Hello everyone and welcome to your lesson on MLA 8. There are two lessons for MLA 8. It's extremely important that you go through both of them because I don't want you to miss anything. It's also extremely important that you pause the video when you need to pause it. Um, and if you want to turn off my lovely voice, you know what to do. There is something on the right hand side that looks like a speaker. You go ahead and press that, and I will be quiet while you go through the presentation. Um, Pretty much how I've set up these presentations, I have them in half, and going through them is important, but also coming in with questions is important. You'll know why in a minute. So let's get started. Okay, so MLA, you've probably have heard this in one way, shape, or another. What you probably know about MLA is that you need that as a format for your papers. That is very true, but it's also an organization. It's called the Modern Language Association, and they decide on formatting and how papers and scholarship papers are written in the English language. It's an international organization. They are in charge of MLA, the actual formatting and the language of MLA, and so they created an 8th edition. This is actually relatively new. It's about a year and a half old, so it's not relatively old. Actually, we were in MLA 7 for a very long time, and you probably learned in MLA 7, so there are some differences here. They did this so that there's a common language between people studying, say, in Kingwood, Texas, and Louisiana, or Columbia, as in the country, but also Columbia, as in the university. So it's a common language. So you have to think of this as that you're learning another language. And by far, I can say this is the simplest version of MLA 8 that has been created. Now, you may not think it's the simplest version because you're just now learning it, but it is the simplest version because there's only one citation for everything, and I'll show you in a little bit. This is what you're going to need for this particular presentation. You are going to need, my friends, an MLA 8 worksheet, which should be on your D2L, but there's also a link to it in this presentation. Pen and paper for notes as usual. You're going to need your Writing Today book and your On Writing Well book and an open mind. I am going to say that your Writing Today book comes with an MLA 8 section in there. So you have that as a reference in addition to this presentation. All right, so here are some things you are going to learn, my friend. You're going to learn how to write a citation that could go on your works cited page, which is extremely important. Your argumentative paper or any paper that you're going to write for my class that is research based will need a works cited page. You're going to practice the citations in different formats. You're going to learn how to use the MLA citation worksheet, which could be your very best friend, and how to list in-text citations. That is extremely important, but that's not going to be until lesson 2. So if you're looking for how to do in-text citations or parenthetical documentation, which is the same thing, that's not until the next lesson. The rules of the game. So not so much the rules of this presentation, but the rules of the game for MLA 8. Here are some common things here. And the first one we're going to actually work on. The first name is listed in that's listed in the citation is always, 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 always. It doesn't matter if it's a book or a TV show or a song or a journal entry. It is always last name, first name. Always, always, always. Now, any names after that, it's always going to be first name, last name. I know it's weird. I did not make that up. I promise you that is MLA. That organization made it up. And we'll work on that a little bit here. The dates that are listed are always listed backwards. They're not listed the way us Americans list them. In fact, we're the only ones on the planet that list dates, month, year, month, day, year. Everyone else on the planet uses day, month, year. The months in MLA are abbreviated to 3 letters except for May. I think that's kind of self-explanatory why May is not abbreviated. Punctuation is important. After each section, there's a period. So please watch out for the punctuations here. There's a 5-space indentation on the second line in any line after the first line. That's called a hanging indentation. Word knows how to do it. I don't know what to push in Word, but I'm pretty sure the librarian knows. That could be an excellent question to ask her when we go to the library. Um, like I said before, there's one citation form for everything, and containers are going to be your very best friend, and we're going to learn about containers in this presentation. So, you're probably wondering what this thing looks like. Let's look at this going vertical here. The actual citation is actually listed horizontally, but it helps to learn this vertically so that way you can literally just fill out what you need to fill. So the author goes first, then it's the title of the source, the containers that I just mentioned, and that we will talk about a little bit more closer towards the end of this presentation, contributors, version, number, publisher, publication date, and location. There's a handy-dandy worksheet, and this is the worksheet I keep talking to you about. It's called the MLA citation worksheet. Our librarians developed it. Click on that link to get a copy of it. In fact, what I would do is I would print out a couple copies if you can of it and bring them to class, of course. So what does this all mean? Okay, so here it is. Here's the lingo. Note that this is important to know what exactly that you're citing, whether you're citing a book versus a story, an article versus an entire magazine, a song versus an entire album. I'll get to that in a minute. This is a note that I wrote to myself to remind myself to tell you about this, but I want to go through what everything means. So, author in this context means the person or persons who created the item you're using as a source. Who created this? It could be authors or editors. You have to know which one it is. Authors means they created it without any assistance. Editors mean they grabbed information from other people to create this big document. So you have to know an editor or an author. The title of source, what that means is what is the name of the thing you are citing? The thing that you're actually using could be different than the title of the container, which is where the information is published originally or where you found it specifically. For example, a story inside of a book is different than a story that is by itself. So if you are citing, say, an article inside of a magazine, say National Geographic, that magazine, National Geographic, is a container. That article that you are using inside of National Geographic is the title of the source. We'll get more in depth in that in a minute here. Other contributors. You want to know who else contributed to the thing that you are citing, because that's important as well. Again, going back to the note that I said earlier, you want to know exactly what you are citing. Are you using just that one thing inside of a magazine or book, or are you using the information from the entire magazine or the entire book? Because those two citations are different. So it depends on what you are citing. So what is in a name? Oh, my friends, lots. So here's where we get to work on last name first name last, and when you use it and when you don't use it. Names are so important, and MLA knows this. And so there's a little quirk here in MLA that you're wanting to know about as you're doing your citation. So let's take this in parts. When you're writing a citation, you're going to use the first name listed. Do not put your author's name in alphabetical order by last name, by middle initial, by first name. No. Names are listed on a book or an article or whatever source. They're listed for a reason. Usually that means that the first person is the most important person. Maybe they did most of the work. Maybe they did a large part of the research. Maybe they were the lead in this research. Do not put them in alphabetical order. There's a reason why that person's the lead. So we don't want to be disrespectful. So now that you know not to put the names out of order, you're going to take that first name and you're going to list it. Last name first, first name last. If you have something with two authors, then you're going to again list the first name with first name, last name first, first name last. Then you're going to put a comma after that, the word and, then the second person's name. And the second person's name is going to be normal. First name, last name. So let me review that. The first person listed, if you have two people, two authors, two anything, the first person is listed last name first, first name last. There's a comma between the last name and the first name. You're going to put another comma after that and the word and then the second person's name is going to be first name, last name. So what if you have more than two authors? Then you're going to use this shortcut. You're going to go ahead and do the same thing you did before, last name, comma, first name. Then you're going to put a comma and the word et, period, al, al, period. And it all means and everyone else. So this is what it looks like. If you have one name for whatever you're citing, it's last name first. Put a period at the end of that. That's the least complicated version of this. If you've got two names that are listed, last name, comma, first name, right? Because it's last name first. Put a comma, the word and, then the first name, last name. But if you have more than two names, say it's Alfredo Cornado, Stuart Neville, and Mary Smith, then what you're going to do is you're going to take this shortcut. You're only going to list the first one listed, the first name listed, and you're going to list it by last name first, comma, et, period, all, al. Et al means and everyone else. So that's a nice little shortcut here. Now for the next couple of slides, I'm going to quiz you on what you just learned. No, I'm not taking a grade, but this is to help you kind of understand that formula of last name first, first name last, and when to use it. So I hope you learned something from the short little quiz that you just did. Again, it's not for a grade, so don't look for this on your in the grade book. But definitely, I hope that helped you a little bit to get to know that little rule there. So one thing that probably came up as you were thinking, what if what I'm citing doesn't have any authors? What if they have editors? What if they have something else other than editors? The same rule applies as far as listing their names. So it's still last name first, first name last, except, here's the exception, you're going to put their titles behind their name. For example, Jeffrey Newberg. In this example, he's an editor. So last name first, Nunberg, first name last, Jeffrey, and then comma, editor, period. If you're going to use two names, it's the same rule, except you would use the word editors with an S, two S, with an S, two editors. All right? Very, very basic. So what if they aren't editors? Oh, yes, it depends on what you're citing. So, for example, maybe you're going to do a paper where you're wanting to cite a performance that an actor does in a movie. Those are actually fun papers to write. You're going to cite the performance, then you're going to write their last name, comma, first name, performer, period. See how that works? Make sure you know what you're citing, right? So here's some examples here. If they've directed something, then it's directed by or directors. If it's illustrated, then it's illustrators. Introduction by, you wouldn't say introductor. You would just say introduction by. Or just write introduction. Narrated by narrator, and so forth. So I hope that clears some stuff up. I now want to move on to quotes versus italics, because this is going to be probably where a lot of folks mess up on their citations. So let's go through this here. When to use italics and when to use quotes. In order to know that, you need to know what a container is. Container is the biggest change between MLA 7 and MLA 8. When I first heard about a container, I thought all the information were going to be put in big Rubbermaid bins, and they were just going to label the bins, and that's what we use to cite. That is not true. Containers are essentially where the information is housed, either inside of a book or a magazine, a database, or a collection. You guys use containers all the time. If you've ever Netflixed something, did a Netflix binge, listened to something on Spotify or Google Play, those are all databases, and those are containers. So you've been using containers for quite a while, so nothing to be afraid of. Knowing what exactly you're citing and where that information is housed will tell you whether the title of the source or container will need to be in quotes or italics. We're going to work on this for a little bit here. I also want to state, if you need to underline this, if you need to put a little star on this in your notes, please do so. Nothing is ever underlined in a citation. If I see an underline on your works cited, I'm going to count that citation wrong because nothing is ever underlined. All right? So, more container stuff. So if you're citing a container or writing the container name in a citation, it is always in italics. Always, always, always. So, for example, if you're citing Kiss of the Spider Woman, which is a movie, it's its own container, fine. The Emergence of Network Culture is a book. It's its own container. It's italicized. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the entire season, all of the seasons, all of the shows, it's its own container. Luke Cage on Netflix can be its own container. And I put an asterisk on that one. You'll see why in a minute. So if you're citing one thing inside of the container, like an episode of Luke Cage, an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, an episode of Grey's Anatomy, a chapter in a book, an article in a magazine, that's going to be in quotation marks because it's found inside of something else. It is being housed or contained inside something else. So, Othello, the play, unless it's by itself, you go to the bookstore and buy the play Othello in a book, it's usually in italics because Othello is usually found in an anthology for literature classes. Romeo and Juliet, the same way, unless you're going to Barnes & Noble or Amazon and buying the play, it's usually in italics. Popular Mechanics is an actual, it's a magazine, but in this case, I'm citing Popular Mechanics, the short story, which is usually contained in something else. So basically, the name of the container is always in italics. The stuff inside of the container is always, 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 always in quotation marks. Pretty much how that works. So let's see what we can learn next. Let's say you wanted to cite an article inside of a magazine, and that article's name is 10 Ways to Make an Awesome Apple Pie. I apologize that most of my examples contain food. So if you're hungry while doing this, my apologies again. So that's the title of the article that you are citing. And that article is inside a magazine called Real Simple. Can you guess which one is going to be in italics and which one will be in quotations? I'll give you a couple seconds before I change the slide to think about it. All right, here's the answer. The article, 10 Ways to Make an Awesome Apple Pie, is contained, that means it's housed or it's inside of the magazine Real Simple. So the answer is that 10 Ways to Make an Awesome Apple Pie is in italics. Real Simple, which is housing that article, is in italics. Want to try one more? Okay. Here's another scenario. Let's say you grab your book on writing well. And remember that chapter I had you read on simplicity? Let's say you wanted to cite that chapter. So what goes in italics and what goes in quotations? Does simplicity go in italics or quotations? What about on writing well? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it before I change the slide. Okay, so here's the answer. The chapter Simplicity is inside or contained in the book on writing well. So, simplicity is in quotations. On writing well is in italics. You want to think about this as whatever is inside of something is a piece of something. That means you need something that's in pieces, which means it's quotations. Quotation marks are 4 pieces, right? There's 4 little marks. So it's pieces. You want the thing that's in pieces to have the pieces, and anything that's solid or a container you want in italics. That's an easy way of trying to remember that. So we've talked about how things look with italics and quotation marks. But we really haven't talked about what things look like in a citation. So this is what I want you to do. This is a challenge I want to give you. Take out your MLA citation worksheet or go back a couple of slides where I have written it on a slide. And I want you to check out the next slide. I'll give you a couple seconds to go look for that. Or you can pause and then we'll look at the next slide together. Okay, so let's look at this. All right, we have this wonderful book on writing well, written by William Zisner. And so we know what the rule is for names. It's last name, first name. So Zisner, comma, William, period. We know that we are citing simplicity that's inside or contained within the book on writing well. So we know that simplicity is in quotation marks. According to our MLA 8 worksheet, there's a period after that. Then we have on writing well. Well, we know on writing well is in italics. We learned that in our last slide. So we're going to go ahead and write that. And we're going to put a comma after that. Now on your worksheet, you probably have a couple of things that are not here, because the next thing that's here is actually the version number. What's so wonderful about this one-size-fit-all thing that MLA did is that if there's not information there, then you can skip it. So there's not any other information other than this is the 30th anniversary edition. So we went ahead and put that in there, and we put a comma there. My version of the book was published by Harper Perennial, so I put the name there. No italics, straight, and they spell it without a space. So I didn't put a space in there. I wrote it just as the publisher wrote it. I put a comma there. And then remember when I said that it is day, month, year. My version of On Writing Well was published on 5 April, and April is abbreviated with 3 letters, APR, period, 2016. I put a comma after that, and then I write the page number of the chapter that I'm citing. Now, here's something that we haven't gone over yet. If you have more than one page, you're going to put 2 P's and a period. Not P period, P period, but 2 P's and a period. And then I put the number 6 through 12 because that's where I'm going to find the chapter simplicity in my book. So I want you to notice a couple of things in the citation. Notice the hanging indentation, the abbreviation of the month, and the PP for page numbers if there's more than one page. You're going to want to notice that because you're going to probably run into that more than likely when you're doing your citations. Here's the challenge though. What if we use the entire book, all of On Writing Well? Not just a chapter or part of it. What if we use the entire book and we wanted to cite the entire book? Can you use your MLA 8 worksheet to figure out what that citation would look like? You can go ahead and pause to see if you can figure it out. I'll see you on the next slide. Okay, so this is what it would look like without the chapter in it. Just straight, I am citing this entire book because I used all of it or most of it in my paper. Last name, first name, last. Still stands, Cisner, comma, William. Then you have On Writing Well. It's in italics. Then a period, because that's what our MLA 8 workshop told us to do, or MLA worksheet told us to do. We have the edition, which is the 30th anniversary edition. Harper Perennial, 5 April 2016. And since we don't have any page numbers, we end our citation right there, period. Do you see the difference between what we just did, what we in the slide before, and what we learned in this slide? There's a pretty subtle difference. We took out our individual thing that we cited. Now, remember when I said Luke Cage was an interesting case? For example, if you're citing all of Luke Cage, all of it, all 13 episodes of Luke Cage, you're writing a paper and all 13 episodes are in there, you're not citing one episode, you're citing all of them, then Luke Cage is found inside of Netflix, which means Luke Cage is in quotations and Netflix is in italics. If you are citing one episode of Luke Cage, maybe the first episode or the fifth episode, you would put the title of the episode in quotations because it is found inside of the series Luke Cage. And Luke Cage then would be in italics. Subtle, subtle differences. I'll explain that subtle difference a little bit more in lesson 2. Okay, so we're towards the end here. Here's what we learned. We learned the rules of the game of MLA, and there's lots of rules here, but some big overarching rules for every citation. We know that MLA is a language. It's like learning Spanish or learning French. It's got its own thing. It's got its own quirks, and we're actually learning this so we can communicate with other people in a different way. Names are important, and so are jobs. So we know that last name first name last is a huge deal. We also know that if they are an editor, we want to say that they're an editor. If we're citing a performance, we want to say a performer. If they're an author, we don't have to say that they're an author. It's just a given if we just put names there. We learned about containers, and containers will set you free. Containers help you decide what's in italics or what's in quotations. We also learned how to use the MLA 8 worksheet, and we learned about what containers look like. They could look like a book, they can look like a magazine, a database, or they could look like Netflix and Spotify. So we learned lots of stuff in